Good evening, how you doing?
Thank you.
Good evening, how you doing?
Secretary, following the interview questions, you will have the opportunity to ask a question or make comments regarding, and make concluding remarks as time allows. We've had the opportunity to review your resume. Please tell us how your background and experiences make you a good fit to be Redford Union's next superintendent and why you want to be our next superintendent.
Can I take my mask off?
Yes, sir, please.
Good evening, members of the board and community members. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm here this evening because I feel like I'm ready to be the next superintendent of Redford Union. Why I feel that way is due to my background. As you notice, I've had an opportunity to work in both the urban and suburban setting. We'll start with the work that I've done in Kansas City Public Schools as the director of secondary schools. I had the opportunity to oversee 9 high schools, 2 middle schools, adult and alternative education. And during my tenure, I was able to increase the graduation rate, develop CTE programs to help students go out and be successful, and create a college and career-going culture in Kansas City Public Schools. So that's why I feel that those experiences have prepared me to be the superintendent. Not to mention, during my time at Harper Woods, I was part of the $34 million bond campaign for the new secondary complex, which I understand that you guys are now seeking a $59 million bond campaign to have a secondary complex as well as some improvements to other schools. So I believe that that experience and the work that I've done over the course of my career has prepared me to be the superintendent here at Redford Union.
Thank you. I'll now turn it over to our Vice President, Mr. Osowski, for the next question.
Good evening.
Please share an example of a time you have led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative. Be specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role, and the outcome.
Sure. The best example that I can provide is the re-emergency or the revamping, the revitalization of the AVID program at Kankakee Junior High in Kankakee School District 111. They had an AVID program that was kind of struggling prior to me getting there, and I was able to work with teachers to generate interest in having them teach the AVID program, and also enlist students to be the CEO of their own learning. So they became a part of the AVID program, and we were able to do some school-wide events, such as create school-wide Cornell notes to help students be successful as it relates to being able to take notes and retain information at that point in time. And the reason why I say the AVID program is so vitally important is because it's the horizontal piece where we were able to revitalize the AVID program in high school as well, due to my 8th graders that when they went to the high school, they wanted AVID to be part of that curriculum there. So the whole concept behind AVID is that there's a student that has college-going capability, who needs some success, they need someone to advocate for them more an opportunity. And that AVID program allows teachers to serve as advocates for students, as well as parents to serve as advocates for students. And we're able to really develop a college and career-going culture with that program. So that's one example that I can provide.
Secretary Rowden.
Hi.
Good evening.
Managing vision and purpose involves anticipating future trends, creating a compelling vision, and communicating that vision. Describe a situation that conveys your capability in this area.
Sure. In terms of being able to create or develop a compelling vision, doing my body of work as an educational leader, you see that I've always had a knack for developing a college and career-going culture. I'm currently doing it now at East English Village in terms of our pharmacy tech program. I'm using the program to make sure students are able to, once they graduate from high school, have the skills to earn a living wage, and also have a next step in terms of either going to school to pursue a certificate for pharmacy tech or be able to have a living wage at that time. Also, other things that I've done to create a college and career-going culture. During my time in Kansas City Public Schools, I was able to revamp the debate program in Central High School. Now, the debate program is important because it teaches students critical skills. And I'll keep coming back to the part of having the students be the CEO of their own learning. So with the debate program, students are able to learn how to argue in a successful way, and they're also learning how to use facts, use research to prove their points. So those are a couple examples of how I'm able to create and also maintain a college and career-going culture, because those programs are still in place. Even though I'm not in Kansas City Public Schools anymore, that program is still alive and thriving, so it's sustainable over time.
Treasurer Bradmore.
Good evening.
Bishop Baldwin.
Oh, sorry. Share a situation that demonstrates your ability to create a climate in which valuing diversity is the norm. What are your experiences in working in diverse communities?
Sure. The bulk of my time has been in urban education as well as suburban education. I'll give you the example of using Rachel's challenge at Stevenson High School during my tenure there as associate high school principal. So we use Rachel's challenge as a program to really help our high school students value the diversity of the school and value each other. As part of Rachel's challenge, they were tasked to go out and do random acts of kindness throughout the school. But they were also taught to embrace the diversity of the school. So they would interact with the key club, they would have a diversity club meeting. These are all activities that was driven by the student body. And parents had a chance to join in when they had the culminating activity of a diversity night. So you have the school as the student body, and then you also have the students pull their parents in as part of that evening event. So those are just, that's really just one example of me being able to value diversity, but work with others so they see the value in it. So it's not a Dr. Ray pushing diversity, it's kids actually taking hold and seeing it as something good and something valuable. And the other piece that I had them do for me is they actually came in and did a staff development with the staff and talking about different angles of diversity in the school at Stevenson High School. Now we're talking about a school with 2,200 students, and with just a great student body that really wanted to see change take place at Stevenson. So that would be the one marquee example that I can provide for you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Tell us about your experiences
Mr. Bailey, can
with,
you come off mute, please?
Alrighty. Tell us about your experiences with student discipline and restorative justice and how you address these practices while also ensuring equity in the final outcome.
Sure. The best example I can give you is what we're currently doing right now with the Expect Respect campaign in Detroit Public Schools Community District. As part of that Respect campaign, students are given character traits each month in which they must embody. And that's part of the restorative justice piece when we're talking about make sure that you're not treating a person a certain way, and they tie it back to their character trait in one. For example, this month is honesty. And so when we start to talk about honesty and the whole restorative justice piece, you have to be honest about how you feel as a student with certain issues happening in school. You have to also be able to know how to handle those issues. So we've been able to see a decrease in our discipline at East English Village due to just that one initiative that the superintendent initiated district-wide. So, you talk about the honesty piece and dealing with academics, you talk about the honesty piece and dealing with behavior, and you also talk about the honesty piece in terms of being a whole child and working with the student at that point. So that's one example that I can provide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Clay.
How have you gone about earning trust in previous positions, and how would you go about doing so if chosen for this position?
Well, one of the best ways that I've found to earn the trust of people is really to be accessible, to be honest, and to be very transparent. If I'm, the one example I'll give you right now is I'm in the process of interviewing for the superintendent of Redford. I have to tell my administrative staff about my interview. And so I'm very honest. I said I want to do more on behalf of children. There's nothing wrong with Detroit Public Schools community district. There's nothing wrong with these senior schools. I'm looking to do more on behalf of children. They understand that. So in the process of building trust with them, I'm honest. And the second piece is being transparent. I think if people can see that you're genuine and you care about children and you want what's best for children, they tend to follow. The other example that I can give in terms of just really being able to build consensus with people, I believe in working with people to figure out what they're good at and supporting them in that process. So, for example, I've had my assistant principals lead staff development when I found the topic that they were good at area. So that's how I kind of build consistency, earn trust, kind of work with them shoulder to shoulder and not put them in positions to fail. I think I've answered your question.
Thank you. Ms. Gray is online and is currently having some Zoom issues, so I'm going to read her question for her. Please tell us what the term culturally competent means to you. Give us an example of how you demonstrate these characteristics.
Sure. Culturally competent to me means being able to understand all people, being able to basically put yourself in their position. For example, when we're talking about children, we want them to feel as if they're valued in this educational process. So if we're being culturally competent, we're celebrating things within their heritage. For example, doing African American Month or doing Hispanic Month or doing Women's Month, we're able to talk about those things that are within their heritage and make them feel valued and cared for at the time. So that would be one example of being culturally responsive and also culturally relevant as well.
Thank you. Tell us how you maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and community.
One of the things that I love to do is I use the term I earned my master's in walking about. So that means that when there's extracurricular activities, I make sure as the superintendent that I'm there and accessible to the community, accessible to parents, and also accessible to students. Other thing that I do is I set up a student advisory council. So I'm able to hear from students firsthand about the great things that are happening in the schools, and they also talk about some things that they would love to see change, and most of the time it's the school lunch. So, I deal with that as well. And then you have to have a parent advisory group so you can keep your hand on the pulse of the community. And so all of those things will be laid out in my key communicator plan that I've developed over the course of the school year. And I will report out to the board during my board briefs about different groups that I met with. I think that it's also important that to have a relationship with the business community, because often I get support in terms of funding for scholarships, internships for students. That allows me to be an advocate in terms of my students being able to do more and be more at the end of the day, because business members are coming in and mentoring students and doing things of that nature. So that's how I kind of stay connected to the community. But it's also a great way to support students. And when they're struggling with something in a classroom or a visit, I can say, hey, just like you were, playing soccer and giving it that effort, you can use the same effort to complete the assignments. Or just like you was, playing basketball and shooting the free throw, you use that same concentration when it comes to solving this math problem. So those would be some things that you would see out of me as selected as superintendent in terms of just being accessible and visible to the school and to the community at large.
Thank you.
Often we learn from successfully facing challenges or experiencing mistakes or failures. Please share a time when this was the case for you. What did you learn from the experience? How did you apply what you learned?
I would say the clear-cut examples that I can use would be school uniforms. During my first year at Central High School in Kansas City Public Schools, because my district, my school set in a high poverty and a high crime area, I wanted my students to be safe walking to school. So I said, you know what? I can save a bunch of money. I can have us all looking like in one school. I'm gonna, have school uniforms. And so I missed an important engagement piece with the parents and just talking about this is how much you'll be able to save when it comes to not having to buy shoes and Jordan shoes at the start of the school year. And, I had a complaint that I had to deal with. And so what I did was I set up a series of parents meetings, and I had a vendor come in, and they were able to really price uniforms at a reasonable price. And once I did the series of parents meeting, kind of like a town hall meeting, then I had to buy in from the parents and the support. And so the kids followed after that. But I just learned that the biggest takeaway for me was how important the engagement piece is with parents. So I've always made sure that I do everything I can to engage parents and be accessible to them before I make decisions that impact their students.
Ms. Rabbit.
This is a management question. Tell us what budget development process you use to gain broad support for the final result.
The budget process that I found to be most successful is zero-based budgeting. Is when you look at the budget from the previous year and kind of start from the bottom about things that principals felt like that they needed in the budget and things that they did not need. And so we were able to present a balanced budget for each school, but also give the principals a sense of empowerment because they're managing their own budget with support from the superintendent. So that's been my budgeting process that seems to work.
Thank you.
Ms. Frymark. Would you like some water?
I have something.
Okay.
I'll take it.
This question is in regards to labor relations. Tell us about your involvement in collective bargaining in general and describe the most challenging negotiation you have conducted. What was so challenging about it? Which of your negotiation techniques was most effective, and what were the results?
So I've had the opportunity to sit on several negotiation teams. During my tenure in Kansas City as the director of secondary schools, I was on the negotiating team for the teachers contract. And the contract was passed by the teachers, but there were some sticking points that neither side was able to understand how it got into the contract. And so it became an issue where they had to reopen the contract to talk about how did this get in there. And looking back, I would say that the biggest aha moment for me is that nobody should leave the room when we're doing negotiations until everything is finalized. Because what ended up happening was that our chief legal counsel misunderstood something that puts under the contract that should not be there. But the whole negotiation team had to come back and talk about it. I said, no, we don't remember that being there. It works in favor of the teachers on this one. So, you just have to be honest and transparent. And one of the things that we made sure that the did was work within the parameters that the board had set for us. For example, they said we were only able to get a 2% increase. And so we knew that walking in, and we basically told the teachers that, hey, in terms of the raise, it's 2% that's supposed to be authorized and work with at this point in time. And what we learned is that once you are honest and say, this is what it is, then the bargaining seems to go a lot better at that point in time. With just one hiccup from the chief legal counsel. But other than that, it was a successful contract.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey?
What are the important
Can you
issues?
come off mute, please?
Okay. So what are the important issues in creating a good board-superintendent relationship? And how do you facilitate such a relationship? And how will you communicate with this board?
Outstanding question. So I noticed that Michigan Association of School Boards have this search. And one of the things that I would ask for, if selected as a superintendent, is to actually have a board retreat so we can actually flush all of those things out. So as part of that board retreat, we would talk about the governance piece. What do you expect from me as a superintendent? I would outline some things in terms of how I would communicate, such as, every Friday or every Monday, you'll get a board brief from me and detailing the events of the school district. And I'll kind of I'll title a couple of topics that you may need to look at. For example, I may say there's a hot spot. Given the fact, hopefully, that we have a successful bond issue, there's always going to be something surrounding the construction piece. They tend to go well, but there's always a hiccup somewhere around the road. But, we'll stay on top of that piece. So as superintendent, the communication piece, and then being able to work with the board president as we set the agendas for board meetings. And then there's individual time that I would spend with each board member. So those meetings will be planned out. And we would talk about things that would be of interest to each board member and making sure that we're putting all of the same notice and we're doing what's best for the children of the community. So as a superintendent, that would be my communication style. And I always find myself to be very collaborative. So as a board, you'll find that you have, and me, that you have a very collaborative superintendent, a very hard-working superintendent, and a superintendent that's very communicative at this point in time. So, but like I said, going back to the board retreat, we would set those guidelines and foundations in terms of how we do business during the course of the school year.
Thank you.
Ms. Lloyd?
Can you unmute your?
I am. Tell us about a challenge you experienced in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue. How did you provide leadership and what was the final outcome?
I would say the most glaring example I would have is probably the last school improvement plan that we did at East Indies Village. And it was just a difference in terms of more math intervention versus more ELA intervention. And being able to talk about with the staff, because they have their ownership of this. What is it? What does these interventions look like? What does this time look like for our children? And how are we putting them in a position to be successful based on the interventions that we're offering at the school? What research are we tagging this to? And I have a very interesting staff, a very diverse staff at these things, and the math people pull real hard, and the English language arts people pull real hard. And so I had to do the roundabout and kind of, have some sidebar conversations with math departments here and also the ELA departments here, and talk about what's our mutual ground so we can help our students be successful. And so we were able to put some interventions in place that we believe is going to help our students really knock out the park this year. But due to COVID, we won't see the fruits of those labors. So that's the example in terms of really being able to work with the school improvement plan and have the right interventions in place to help students be successful beyond the school day and beyond high school.
Ms. Gray, do you want to come on mute and answer your question, or do you want me to read it? I can't hear. That's fine. You want me to read it? Okay. All right. What practices and procedures would you use to keep your board informed?
As I said before, one of the things is weekly communication for me, such as it will be a Monday morning update or a Friday evening update, and we'll kind of discuss that if selected on the board retreat. The other things, if it's a hot topic and something that you need to know right away, I'll do the email, I'll do the text message, and if it's something that should not be put in email or text, due to, maybe an issue with student, issue with employee, then it's a phone call that you'll receive and say, hey, I need to make you aware of the situation. But you can always expect timely communication from me. And just like as a superintendent, I would not want to be caught off guard by something from my administrators. As your one and only employee, I would not want you caught off guard by something that happened in the district and you have no idea. My goal as the superintendent is to keep you well informed. And if anything, over-communicate instead of under-communicate. You may have to say, hey, Dr. Gray, we don't need to know all of that. But just to keep the board well informed so you're not ambushed and you can answer to your constituents and feel good about the job that you do.
Thank you. What unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will Redford Union students and staff be served by this?
Can you repeat that one more time?
What unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will Redford Union students and staff be served by this?
I think the unique skills and leverage that I bring to this position is one, being able to know and understand the bond campaign and just kind of what would happen once the construction starts, being able to put together a master schedule of plans where students are not displaced and have there be an interruption to learning, based on how the design is laid out. Also, I really believe that my skills in terms of creating a college-going culture, I love the fact that you guys said pre-K to 12. I love that. So basically from the cradle to the time that we graduate, and we're able to create a college-going culture. I have some ideas in terms of what we can do to enhance that. And I'll just give you the one example. I had an opportunity to take a group of kids when I was at the Redford secondary schools to a diversity conference at North Park University in Chicago. And the students was part of the conference, and they got to have a round table with 2 college presidents from HBCUs. And once the college presidents talked with the students and explained, hey, I am out fundraising so I can offer a presidential scholarship to a student that has a certain GPA and a certain ACT or SAT score. And just the look on the student's face, like, I can get a presidential scholarship. They said, absolutely. And the questions that they were able to ask and interaction with those 2 college presidents, they left with an impression. I knew that those 4 students in Kansas City Public Schools were college bound at that point in time. Because when they got back to the district, they went to the board meeting and told everyone about how they had a chance to sit down and talk with the president of Langston University, the president of Lincoln at the time, Lincoln University at the time. So being able to craft experiences like that, student record really is something that I'm excited about, and really plant that seed about college readiness from pre-K all the way through high school. And I was just doing a quick look at some of the data. 53% of our students are college bound, let's say New York Road in the secondary institute. So I know that we're better than 53%. So I think I can definitely do something about it. So that's the type of excitement that I'll bring as it relates to college, career-going culture. And I do understand the other end of the spectrum. Some students are not college bound. That's why we have to have a career piece. And I have a large number of students in East and West Village that are not college bound due to a number of reasons. And so we have a career piece in terms of getting them into a trade school or making sure that they have a trade before they leave high school so they can earn a living wage. And so I would want the same thing as the superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Osowski?
Tell us how your previous professional experiences in education have influenced you as a leader.
One more time, please.
Tell us how your previous professional experiences in education have influenced you as a leader.
My previous experience in education has been unique and interesting. I had a founding teacher. I graduated from Monroe Public Schools down there. I had a founding teacher by the name of Steve Witt that took an interest in me and said, Larry, I see some leadership qualities in you. So, you should look at planning and quarterback as a ninth grader. And because of that experience there, and it kind of changed my trajectory in terms of seeing myself as a leader. And it stuck with me all the way through college. I went to college, and during my time out of college, they had some issues as it relates to race relations. But I was able to stand up and be a voice of reasoning because of these leadership skills that I learned along the way. At Monroe Public Schools was one teacher, Steve Witt. So that's the early on piece. In terms of the professional development, I've had the opportunity to be a part of 2 different superintendent academies that have prepared me for this role of leadership. I've had the opportunity to be a part of the National Institute for School Leadership, which has given me some excellent skills as it relates to being able to track and understand data and use data to inform and improve instruction. So those are just a couple of key examples that have prepared me for the superintendency.
Ms. Robinson?
Describe your experience as an educational advocate at the local, state, or national level.
Sure. I haven't had a chance to do much here in Michigan, but during my time in Kansas City, I was able to advocate for students kind of at the national level. We had a group of professional development called Educational Policies. And so I had a chance to sit in and read policies, and then we had a trip to DC where we were able to talk with our local legislators about some of the policies as it relates to education in Kansas City, Missouri at that point in time. And so I would look to do the same thing here in terms of reach out to our representative from this area and talk about some of the things that may impact our community, what assistance and support we may need from them.
Thank you.
Dr. Gray, we appreciate your, Dr. Gray, we appreciate your interest in becoming our next superintendent. Do you have any questions for us or anything that we haven't talked about?
No, you guys have done a great job with the questions. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
So we appreciate your interest, and we'll be interviewing a number of candidates. We'll contact you if you're selected as a finalist, but I want to thank you so much for coming here tonight and sharing your story with us. We enjoyed meeting you.
Thank you. I will shake your hand, but thanks for it.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody to fill out their candidate feedback form. And following the interview questions, you will have the opportunity to ask a question and to make concluding remarks as time allows. We have the opportunity to review your resume, can you please tell us how your background and experiences make you a good fit to be Redford Union's next superintendent, and why you want to be our next superintendent? Please take your mask off so the people in the audience can. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Board of Education, President Kabachi. I just want to thank you for this opportunity tonight. My most recent experience has been that, as I believe best prepared you for this opportunity, has been to be the interim superintendent of Redford Union School District since July 1st of 2020. And as of March, the March board meeting, the superintendent of Redford Union Schools. I believe the leadership opportunities that I've had professionally as an educational leader have prepared me well in a variety of different school districts and also in the higher education setting. I am most interested in this opportunity with Redford Union Schools to hopefully be the next superintendent in this district, continuing beyond June 30th because of the fact that I'm passionate about this district. I'm passionate about our students. I'm passionate about our students. I'm passionate about our community. I'm passionate about our people. We are on the verge of some wonderful things here in Redford Union Schools. I've had the fortunate opportunity to help lead alongside others within this district on many of those initiatives and things that are in the plans. And I know this district has a bright future, and I would welcome the opportunity to continue to work alongside the staff members within this district and to work for the students and the community members within the district.
Thank you, Mr. Witt. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Osowski for his next question.
Please share an example of a time you have led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative. Be specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role in help.
All right. Thank you for that question. One important school improvement initiative that I had the fortunate ability to be involved in co-leading along with an assistant superintendent colleague of mine within the Troy School District was in 2011 when the state made significant legislative changes to the teacher evaluation process within the state of Michigan. Those changes were very numerous in number, and there were a lot of legal provisions that were adopted as a result of those legislative changes. Some of which were open to some interpretation. And another important change was the fact that the legislature made the decision to make that particular topic a prohibited subject of bargaining. So that led to some interesting reactions by some of the labor representatives around the state. And it called for us still, regardless of that decision by the legislature, to utilize a very collaborative approach to still finalize and develop and create really from scratch in many respects, a new teacher evaluation process. In Troy School District, we actually worked with a collaborative group of stakeholders that included teachers at all grade levels, teachers from various subject areas, administrators from various grade levels and various buildings across the district, as well as union representatives and myself and other central office administrators to develop a very meaningful process that was intended to help grow and develop teachers. And we utilized the Danielson framework as the framework of teaching, the Danielson model as the basis for our teacher evaluation model that we built. The important thing to remember was we had to really build that process from scratch in line with what the legislature required. The next step was, outside of our efforts to collaboratively build that process, we then had to take steps to build competency, consistency, and understanding within that new process. And that included lots of significant efforts to not only train evaluators within the new model and the expectations for them as evaluators in the model, but also bringing teachers up to speed with the expectation for them as the individuals being evaluated within that process. There were also student growth aspects to that process that were new to public education as part of that legislation, and there had to be a lot of collaborative discussion and formulation about what those student growth aspects should be. Those were all processes that I was co-led along with the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Instruction at the time, Dr. Rich Machesky. And it was an ongoing effort because from one year to the next, we were bringing that same group together to review the process, to discuss what had worked, to discuss what could be improved, and also the legislature along the way made even additional changes to the legislation that impacted the teacher evaluation process as well. And obviously, just closing out this response, that was a school improvement effort because the most important thing we can do is help support and develop our teachers in a meaningful way and give them meaningful feedback to help drive the instruction that they are providing to our students.
Ms. Robinson?
Hi.
Okay. Managing vision and purpose involves anticipating future trends, creating a compelling vision, and communicating that vision. I can't unmute because I'm not okay. Describe a situation that conveys your ability in this area. Do you want me to repeat?
If you could, please.
Managing vision and purpose involves anticipating future trends, creating a compelling vision, and communicating that vision. Describe a situation that conveys your capability in this area.
I think the most immediate instance that comes to mind based on my experiences is actually our own district's 2021 bond proposal. That's on the ballot on May 4th, as I know we board members are all aware. But within that process, we did have to take a strong look at future trends, and that included looking at the needs assessment of our facilities and what our needs were there, required us to look at trends in programming from a student perspective and the educational opportunities that make the most sense for students and families within the Redford Union Schools community. And it also required us to take a hard look at some of our geographic footprint within the district based on the enrollment projections that we have and the capacity levels we have within our existing buildings. I think from there, it's been a collaborative and joint effort, which I've been fortunate and blessed to spearhead, to create and help develop a shared vision for what we want our schools within Redford Union Schools to be. That includes, again, taking a close look at the educational programming and what type of programming we feel will best fit our students' needs, and having open discussion with key stakeholders around those things. We cannot accomplish all that we need to accomplish without involving our stakeholders and building that shared vision. Those stakeholders obviously include the Board of Education. There were times where I know you are all familiar where we had to sit down within that process and make sure that the board was aware of at least the general recommendations and general plans for those bond dollars that we hope will be coming our way with the community support. It involved consistent conversations with staff I met along with the group of administrators who lead the steering committee for that bond initiative with the union leadership to confirm whether they had questions and make sure they understood the scope of the bond plans, and ultimately to seek their support for the bond initiative. I've had the opportunity to try to build that vision within community leaders and other community influencers through some one-on-one or small group conversations that we've been able to have with those individuals. And I also have had the opportunity to have informational meetings for the community, as well as other avenues that we've made sure to make various forms of information available to our community and to make them aware of this important bond initiative and all that it would help us accomplish for our students and our staff going forward.
Thank you.
Ms. Fryborn?
Share a situation that demonstrates your ability to create a climate in which valuing diversity is the norm. What are your experiences in working in diverse communities?
Well, first of all, diversity is something that needs to be embraced and valued, and I have various experiences both here within the district, but also previous roles in some of my previous positions. I had the fortunate opportunity to be the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Council at Oakland Community College, where we work closely with staff and students to bring forth diversity and inclusion issues, to create important diversity and inclusion awareness events for both staff and students within the Oakland Community College community. And also to, I think a key part of embracing and showing you value diversity is making sure that you are willing to assess that. How are we doing in that important area? I think you need to be willing to survey your community, your staff, in those important areas, and then you need to be willing to live with what the results of those surveys show you and respond to what those surveys show you. That was something I had direct experience with at Oakland Community College and also in Troy School District, where I had the opportunity to co-found and lead the Troy School District's Diversity and Inclusion Council. There we had a combination of staff being a K-12 setting rather than a higher ed setting, had the opportunity to involve not only staff and students, but also parents within those diversity and inclusion discussions. And I worked with a consultant, a diversity and inclusion consultant, early on in that process to help develop a survey that was administered district-wide. And again, following up on my previous point, we had to be willing to look at the results of that survey and what our community was telling us with how we were doing as a district and as staff members at various positions with regards to the issues of diversity and inclusiveness. I also had the opportunity to also be the Title IX coordinator within Oakland Community College and the University of Texas Permian Basin. And in those higher ed settings, that gave me experience with dealing firsthand with issues regarding diversity and inclusion issues specifically related to questions of gender inequities as well. So I have a wealth of experience in that area. I know we need to not only embrace and be aware of, but celebrate the diversity that we have within our community and within our school district. And we need to take that diversity into account as we make significant decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
One important note before the next question, if I might interject, is because I realize I missed this component of the question. I have invested in this community since my arrival. I have made it an effort to make sure that I'm involved within the community and getting to know the community and present on the weekends at sporting events and different functions like that to make sure that I am aware of the community. And I forgot to add that aspect as well to that question. So, Mr. Witt.
So tell us about your experiences with student discipline and restorative justice and how you address these practices while also ensuring equity in the final outcome.
My experience with student discipline actually goes back to my first opportunity in school administration as a director of personnel and employee services with Allen Park Public Schools. Being a smaller district, I had a direct role there, not only advising building level administration on student disciplinary issues, and part of that was a result of my legal background, but I also was the appeals officer within the student discipline process. So anytime there might have been a suspension or expulsion that was challenged and appealed through the code of conduct process, I represented the board relative to that appeal and had to consider and render those decisions. When it comes to restorative justice and restorative practices, I believe that because it was clear that the typical mandated student disciplinary processes within the Michigan laws were having a disparate impact on minority students in particular when it came to expulsions and suspensions, that restorative practices is a critical part of any process or procedure or policies you have relative to student discipline. I also know that since I've been here, I haven't noticed any student appeals or disciplinary cases coming to this Board of Education, and I can tell you from my prior experience in K-12, when there were certain disciplines mandated and disciplinary actions that warranted specific mandated consequences, those appeals were coming forward to boards of education on a regular basis. I know the restorative process is a big component to giving our students a fair chance to learn from the mistakes they made and may have made. It's also an opportunity for all the voices who were maybe impacted by the decisions that that student may have made in a particular case, which could be fellow students, it could be staff members. The restorative practice allows for the voices of anyone impacted by that student's decisions an opportunity to be heard, and I believe that's a critical part to a process that ultimately will hopefully allow the student to return to the school setting and to do so with hopefully a fresh start. There definitely need to be consequences to student misconduct, but we also have to be fair with all involved in the process, and it is a real balance, but we need to be fair with our students so that hopefully one decision or even a couple decisions they make at a particular moment in time for a variety of reasons doesn't jeopardize their ability to receive an appropriate public education going forward.
Thank you.
Ms. Floyd?
Hi. How have you gone about earning trust in previous positions
It's a great question. I think the most success that I've had in previous positions, and even as I transition here, being one of those positions, I think you need to make sure that you're visible and that you work to have meaningful interactions with the people that you work with. I believe that that trust that you build, that trust is also built by being consistent and being reliable. People need to know what to expect, and consistency and reliability are definite factors to build the trust. I believe another factor that helps build that trust is working to make informed decisions and not rushing to decisions. Making sure you have all the facts before you make decisions builds trust, as well as allowing you, I think another real important factor to building trust, and this has been successful for me in other places as well, although it's not always the most comfortable, is you have to be genuine and vulnerable as an individual. We're humans. The best way you build trust with individuals is to be real with them. It's okay to let people know you're not having the best day. It's okay to let people know you may be facing personal issues at home. When you can do that with your coworkers, maybe even admit some of your own weaknesses, I think that that builds a lot of trust. And I also believe firmly and have found that another thing that builds trust is you kind of need to make people aware of what your non-negotiables are. As an individual, all of us as individuals, I think, have key values that we hold truest to, and I think people need to understand what those key values are to you, what those non-negotiables are. And I think as long as you live out those values and people see you're genuine in the way you live those out, that goes a tremendous way towards building real trust that can help people get through some tough situations, even situations where they might agree to disagree. That trust can go a long way to still allowing for those relationships to be formed.
Thank you. Trustee Gray is on Zoom, and I will be reading your questions. Please tell us what the term culturally competent means to you. Give an example of how you demonstrate this characteristic.
Being culturally competent to me is, it means having the ability to understand and communicate effectively and to interact effectively with people across cultures. People who may have different norms, beliefs, and behaviors. That's what our culture is. I believe, again, that cultural competence is a starting point. It should be a minimal expectation. The journey towards building cultural competency is an ongoing one, and there are steps even beyond being culturally competent. I think you need to strive towards being culturally proficient and even culturally responsive. And again, that's an ongoing journey. I also think being culturally competent and beyond, hopefully, through that ongoing journey, you need to be aware of your own worldview and what your own culture and beliefs and norms and values are. And then you need to realize, again, be vulnerable and willing to share what your values are, what those norms are for you. But you also need to be quick not to judge. And part of becoming more culturally competent or working towards that cultural proficiency is really taking the time to deeply reflect upon biases you might have, upon preconceptions you might have, and quite honestly, as you build some of that trust referred to in the previous question, being willing to ask questions that relate to cultural differences and have professional, friendly conversations around some of those cultural differences so you can have a better understanding for why people of different cultures might have those norms and beliefs. I think ultimately the question of cultural competency is a key one when it comes to the student-teacher relationship. There is a newer notion about what's called culturally responsive teaching, and really that's understanding the cultural nuances that might damage the student-teacher relationship in some way. I think everyone on this board at one time or another has probably heard that students need to know you care before they care to know whatever it is you're trying to teach them. And I think building and making sure that at a minimum the staff within this district are not only cultural competent, but hopefully building towards what lies beyond cultural competency would go a long way in making sure that the students know that our staff care about them and who they are as individuals.
Thank you. Can you tell us how you maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and community groups?
Yes. One of the key things is, in today's world where we're pulled in so many different directions, you have to plan and schedule that time. This is something that I hope to expand upon if provided this opportunity going forward. Obviously, some opportunities, or at least opportunities to meet with the community, to meet with certain staff members even, are not what we would hope for them to be in the current pandemic environment. However, I know that I've already scheduled time on a regular basis to meet with the administrators within this district in multiple different types of meetings, in smaller meetings, in larger group settings. And those meetings, I can tell you honestly, with everything else that draws my attention during the day, those meetings happen because they're on my calendar, they're on other people's calendars, and I've scheduled them. I think it's important for people to know that I am accessible by taking intentional and purposeful visits to their building, but sometimes visits to their building without any particular purpose in mind. I know it's important to get plugged into the community groups that exist. I've already had the opportunity, somewhat with some assistance from my counterpart in South Redford, Mr. Galvez, to take part in, he's made sure I'm aware of community organizations that are meeting and when they're meeting, and I've had opportunities to get plugged into some of those meetings as well. I think communication and creating opportunities for communication is critical as well to as far as visibility and accessibility goes. And when, again, we get more to a more normal setting, and potentially virtually before that, I would like to create more opportunities to interact with staff and members of the community. I know different superintendents have different approaches. There's community coffees. I've already thought about a tagline for mine, which would be Java with Jasen, and I would like the opportunity to implement that, where both staff, members of the community, and others could feel free to come to a community coffee that we're able to set up.
Thank you. Mr. Osowski?
Often we learn from successfully facing challenges or experiencing mistakes or failure. Please share a time when this was the case for you. What did you learn from this experience, How did you apply what you learned?
Wow, that's a great question.
How did you do it?
And there's a lot of parts in it. I think the biggest challenge that I was able to successfully face that most immediately comes to mind is actually a challenge of a personal nature. And thankfully, with the help of many medical professionals, and I know a lot of interaction with God. The birth of my premature twins was, I think, the most challenging aspect that I have ever had to overcome in my life. My twins were born very premature at 26 weeks. They spent their first 83 days of their lives in the hospital. And that taught me the importance of family, health, life, and balance in life. It also provided me an opportunity for empathy for others who are in similar life-impacting experiences. And I think it just helps shape what's really important at the end of the day. Not that what we do here and the many things we undertake here aren't important, because they impact kids' lives too. So they definitely are. But that is a successful challenge that I've learned that's allowed me to really grow and have more empathy for others when they're facing anything of that significance. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
This is a this is a manager question. Oh,
Hopefully a less emotional.
yeah, we'll switch it up. Tell us what budget development process you use to gain broad support for the final result.
Okay. Although I know school budgets can sometimes be emotional as well. But my experience with budgeting begins with a student-focused approach to budgeting. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing what our needs and wants are. And clearly within that, there are things from a staff standpoint that we have to always account for. But what needs to drive that budgeting process to me is a focus on what our students need most and what those priorities have to be to meet those most basic learning and social emotional learning needs of our students. My preferred approach to budgeting is probably, I guess you might label it, a modified zero-based budgeting approach. I think there are plenty of flaws that can take place by just rolling over a budget year to year to year and just saying because there was X amount of dollars in a fund one year that there needs to be X amount of funds of dollars in another year. Because our needs, the needs of our students are ever changing, and we should be looking at what our student needs are, their most immediate needs, and trying to best allocate the available resources we have to meet those needs. I can tell you full well how we're gonna have to budget for the coming school year. And there are gonna be some federal funds available and things like that. But the learning needs of our students are gonna have to drive what we do to help begin to even address that learning gap that this pandemic has caused to expand everywhere, not only here in Redford Union, but elsewhere. I am not a CFO. I don't pretend to be a CFO. I rely heavily upon a capable and experienced CFO within any budgeting process I've done. In my role as an HR administrator, I work closely with the CFO everywhere I've been within the development budget development process along with the superintendent and the Board of Education. I realize that the bulk of our budget lies within our people-related costs. And so I have experience with those decisions related that impact staff. I also believe that we need to be very transparent within our budget process. I like the committee approach, but I also believe that the full board needs to be aware of what's going on and what's driving some of the budget recommendations well before they're asked to vote upon that budget. And I also believe in communicating with impacted staff. Sometimes those communications need to take place before those budget decisions are ultimately made, and sometimes there's communication that has to take place after those budget recommendations have been enacted. And those are all things that I have a significant amount of experience with, both in good financial times and challenging financial circumstances.
Thank you. Ms. Craig.
Tell us about your involvement in collective bargaining in general, and describe the most challenging negotiation you have conducted. What was so challenging about it? Which of your negotiating techniques was most effective, and what were the results?
My collective bargaining experience is extensive. I have 21 plus years of bargaining experience, specifically within the public education setting. So I have extensive experience. I have extensive experience in traditional negotiations. I have extensive experience with the use of the interest-based bargaining process, and recently introduced that process here with our two support staff union groups. I'm pleased to report we will be utilizing the interest-based bargaining process in a couple weeks here with those groups and getting those contract negotiations underway. I also have experience here locally with negotiating agreements, short-term agreements given the pandemic circumstances with each of our 4 bargaining units, including an agreement with our Redford Union Education Association that represents our teachers, an agreement that was able to provide step increases to our teachers for the first time in a number of years here within the district. Those things being said, the most challenging negotiation experience for me actually happened in Troy School District. And the circumstances were such that we were in negotiation with our support staff groups. And I know decisions were made here in the past, but we were simultaneously in a position where the board had to consider their fiscal responsibility and was looking at third-party contracting of some support services. That was the most difficult, by far, challenging negotiations experience, because as the chief HR officer within that district, I had to be involved in both the discussions or potential recommendations around the third-party contracting, but we had a support staff unit that represented a number of different support staff positions all in one group. It had the transportation was in that group, the food service was in that group, but the para-educators were in that group. Secretaries were in that group. And we all had to sit down and try to bargain at the same time while we were moving through that third-party contracting process. It made the dynamics extremely interesting at the table because, quite honestly, the result was the only way that the people whose positions, and ultimately it was food service and it was transportation, whose positions were contracted, the only way that they could make a grasp at obtaining similar savings was by making drastic concessions and actually having other people whose positions weren't able to be subcontracted make concessions as well. And it was interesting because the whole time we were having those negotiations, I remember the person representing the union also had a job to do at the table and also challenging the board with regards to its decision about whether to contract or not to contract. Ultimately, again, that Board of Education made the decision to contract certain positions. I'm fortunate to say that we did that in a very humane way. We did that by making sure that every one of those people in transportation and food service whose positions were being contracted would be paid a higher wage rate if they were employed, if they chose to go to the new company that we were making awarding the third-party contract to for those services. And I think the biggest compliment I took out of the bargaining process itself was our transportation director, who really wrestled himself extensively with the decision to third-party contract that particular service. He told me after the fact that he was going back to that bus garage, every morning following a bargaining session, and he told me that he was telling those people that I know you guys don't like Jasen right now, and you think Jasen's against you, and you think Jasen out to get you. And he told them point blank that all I can tell you is I'm at the bargaining table, and Jasen's fighting harder right now for you guys to keep your jobs with the district than their labor representative was fighting. So no doubt in those challenging negotiations, and the result wasn't what everybody really maybe desired from a staff standpoint. But again, we went about that and made sure to intentionally go about that in a very humane way to make sure that those people's, at least their base wage rate, while their benefits change and things like that, their base wage rate for our employees who elected to go to those third-party companies, we were able to keep roughly the same as it was when they were employed with us.
Mr. Bailey.
So this is a two-part question. What are the important issues in creating a good board-superintendent relationship, and how do you facilitate such a relationship? The other question is, how will you communicate with this board?
I think respectful communication is the foundation for a positive board-superintendent relationship. A genuine willingness to listen, and I believe when I talk about communication, it's being willing to listen as much as it is being willing to share your thinking and any other comments and things you might have. That communication is clearly a two-way street, and it needs to be a two-way street for that board-superintendent relationship to be as ideal as it could be. I also believe that understanding and embracing roles and expectations is a critical part to a positive board and superintendent relationship. At times, and how I would go about forming that relationship and building upon the relationship that I believe I already have with members of this board and the board in general would be potentially to look at MASB as a resource. I also believe it's important for new board members to be providing opportunities not only through MASB, but opportunities for kind of a new board member orientation, an opportunity to meet with various representatives of the administrative team that they might interact with in their board capacity, and ask questions about the particular areas that those administrators oversee is an important aspect to building that relationship for a new board member. I spoke about my extensive experience with collective bargaining. My legal position, working directly with public school clients around the state, prior to moving into public education administrative roles for the last 16 years, that whole time gives me 21 plus years experience of having interactions and opportunities to interact with boards of education. I believe it's critical to communicate with the board in various ways, both informally and formally, so that the board can make informed decisions. I recall a conversation early on when I became interim, and I know a couple board members that I had the opportunity to meet with, and the subcommittee that was designated to have some of that discussion was that they wanted to make informed decisions and would like to have that information as much in advance of that decision needing to be made as possible. And that's something that I'm committed to doing as well, because I think allowing boards to make informed decisions and to have informed discussions and even at times informed debates is what will ultimately build a positive board superintendent relationship.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Kaloy.
Bye.
Tell us about a challenge you've experienced in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue. How did you provide leadership and what was the final outcome?
The most immediate example that comes to my mind when I had the opportunity to work with a diverse group of people and build a consensus is actually an opportunity I had to revamp the teacher, both the teacher and administrator hiring processes within the Troy School District. When I first arrived to the Troy School District, I was pleased to find the amount of candidates and applicants we had for almost every position. And I knew we were hiring good candidates for each and every position because I met with those individuals before they were recommended to the board for hiring. But I wasn't convinced when I met with some of those same individuals that we were always hiring the best applicant from the applicant pool. And that's because initially, when I first arrived, the hiring process, and it's a very large district with multiple elementary schools, multiple middle schools, multiple high schools, it was very building basis, building centered. And I just wasn't convinced that there might not be some better applicants within an applicant pool that sometimes had over 100 applicants for a single teaching position. So, where I started was I got support from the top. I went to my superintendent. I let her know my observations. She had actually been with the district a long time in various administrative capacities, and she agreed that we might need to look at the process. So now, as a new administrator to the district, a younger administrator to the district, who actually attended school in that district and knew some of these administrators who were veterans, had to pull a group of veteran administrators, newer hired administrators who were younger to the district, and work through a process to build consensus on a more centralized hiring process that involved a lot of more broader scope input from a broader group of administrators on who the best teacher candidates were very early on in the process, to then identify like the 10 strongest elementary teacher candidates in the district collectively were identified by this group of administrators instead of being identified by a single building administrator. What that allowed us to do was actually enhance our hiring process, because then when we knew what our specific teaching opportunities were, the building principal then knew who the top 10 early elementary teaching candidates were, as vetted by their peers across the district. that took an enormous amount of effort to facilitate discussions, to look. I know during that time, there were veteran administrators who went to the superintendent and said, you're not really letting them take our right to recommend whoever we want, are you? And those conversations took place. The most positive result was not only an improved process for the hiring of teachers, we also built an improved hiring process for our administrators as well. And many of those same veteran principals came back to me at the end of the day and said, after we used the new process to hire a large number of teachers in that district, that they had to admit that we had never hired a better group of teachers, top to bottom, within the district.
What practices and procedures would you use to keep the board informed?
I touched on this in my earlier response, but I would just reiterate, both regular, informal, and formal communication are key. Encouraging dialogue is key to making sure, and again, that's a two-way street. If I become aware, and this has been my practice since I've been working as interim superintendent and superintendent, to keep the board informed of the most critical needs. Not everything that ends up on my desk is communicated to the board, nor should that be the case. But those most important things, or importantly, the things that I believe you might hear from a staff member or community member about, I like to provide you at least the baseline information relative to those issues. Again, sometimes it's through an email, sometimes through text communication. I also know we have subcommittees in place, and there are plenty of things that I like the subcommittee structure for, but I also believe strongly in the ability of the full board at times to hear all of the same information at the same time. And so I believe board workshops are a key component to keeping the board informed as well. And I think those board workshops also help with keeping the board informed and giving them time to consider a lot of information when possible, well before specific decisions have to be made. And again, that's, I know, an important thing for the members of this Board of Education.
So we appreciate your interest in becoming our next superintendent. Pardon me? One more? All right.
Sorry.
All right. What unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will Redford Union students and staff be served by this?
I think my skills as an advocate, my legal background is something that is unique, that I would bring to this position that other candidates would not. My extensive experience at the central office level, again in a variety of districts, one previous district in Wayne County, one in Oakland County. Those professional experiences, my experience in higher education as well, gives me a different viewpoint on some things. I also believe the fact that and first and foremost, let me say, I fully understand that the superintendent position has key and primary responsibility for the instruction that takes place in this district. At the same time, I think one unique quality I bring that other candidates might not is that I'm not a native educator. I was not a classroom teacher. I've been around classroom teachers. I've learned a lot about classroom instruction through the evaluation process that I've helped develop. I've been in situations where I've advised building principals on performance improvement plans to enhance and develop teachers who are in need of improvement. But I will say this, that outside perspective, I think is something unique that would benefit not only the staff and the students. I'm not tied to the status quo that sometimes exists in public education settings. I have an open mind to creative solutions to issues that we face in public education. And I can tell you full well that there are an enormous amount of educators in this district, both at the administrative level at the teacher level and elsewhere who are more than willing to share with me their opinion from an educational aspect whenever that opportunity is provided, and sometimes even when that opportunity might not be provided. So I just think that outside perspective is a very unique thing that would benefit our staff and our students and help us do some creative and meaningful things collectively going forward.
All right, we appreciate your interest in our superintendent position. The board is interviewing a number of candidates, and we will contact you if you are selected as a finalist. Thank you for coming and joining us this evening. We enjoyed meeting you.
Thank you.
I would also like to encourage the audience to complete their feedback form after the interview.